Hi, I'm Dan Weston from Confluent. In this video, we'll look at configuring custom offsets for your source and sink connectors in Confluent Cloud. An offset is ApacheKafka's method for tracking messages. There are two types of offsets, source and sink. In the case of source offsets, it's defined as you configure the source connector. This would typically be a record locator ID that you're using in the source. In our case, we have a field called record number that we'll be using in the upcoming demo. For a sink connector, we will be using the actual Kafka offset. While they are both called offsets, only a sink connector uses the Kafka offset. There are three main reasons to use custom offsets. First, if you want to replay or reprocess the messages, or skip a bad record. This includes a disaster recovery scenario where you need to reprocess any data that may have been missed. 2, maybe you want to migrate from a self-managed connector to a fully managed connector. And number 3, let's say you want to start pushing data into a new target system without reprocessing it from the beginning. In all of these cases, starting from the beginning may not be possible or is unnecessary and a waste of time and resources. So we use a custom offset to let the source or sink know where you'd like to start processing the data. Before we get into a demo of how custom offsets work, I want to briefly explain how our sample application works. To get the messages into Kafka, we'll use the HTTP v2 source connector, which connects to an application that is set up to cycle through 20 records, and return them in JSON format. This application takes a single get parameter called offset, which decides which record number it should start returning our records from. Then we'll use the S3 sink connector to dump our messages into an S3 bucket. With that, let's take a look at how to set up custom offsets for sources and sinks in Confluent Cloud. Here I have a new cluster set up in Confluent Cloud. I don't have any topics or connectors running. The only setup is I've added an AWS integration to easily connect my sink connector to an existing S3 bucket. I'll head over to the connectors page and add my source connector. In this case, I'll be using the HTTP source connector. I'll give it a name of offset source. Now we can either provide our configuration for our source via a URL or by uploading a YAML file. In my case, I have a YAML file that provides the URL, publishing path, and basic schema for the publishing point. If you would like a more in-depth walkthrough of the HTTP source v2 connector, be sure to check out the video by my colleague Peter on Confluent Developer. I'll select Add File, Upload File, and then select my YAML file. I'll also select the format for my messages. In this case, I'm using JSON SR, and then I'll click Continue. I'll generate an API key and download it, and click Continue. Here I can verify the URL for my source and provide authentication if needed. In my case, I've not configured any authentication, so I'll go ahead and click Continue. I'll select the path that I provided in the YAML file and click Continue. If I already had a topic set up, I could select that here. In my case, I'll create a new topic for my messages. I'll call it Source Names. I also need to provide it with the request configuration. In this case, I'm telling the source connector to provide the offset I would like in the URL so that I can match that with the record number. The key value was provided in my YAML file as well. I'll go ahead and enter the value. Next, I'll click on Settings. There are 3 offset modes that are supported: simple incrementing, chaining, and cursor pagination. I'll leave the offset mode to simple incrementing and set the initial offset to offset 5. Under Show Additional Settings, I'll also change the request interval to 6,000, which will send a request every 6 seconds. Now I can click the Test button in the upper right and click Test again, and I should see my first value. And there we go, record number 5, it's correct. Now that I know that it's working, I can go ahead and click Continue. I don't need to create any single message transforms, so I'll go ahead and click Continue. I'll leave the default sizing of 1 task and click Continue. Now I'll be able to take a look at all the settings that I've configured before my connector is deployed. I can also select to switch to the JSON view where I could copy the configuration and use it to automate creating an HTTP source connector in the future. Now I'll go ahead and click Launch Connector. In order to see if my messages are coming in, I'll head over to my topics and click on my topic name. I'll then select to view my messages from the beginning and look to see if the first message that came in was in fact record number 5, and it is. If at any point I'd like my connector to read at a different offset, I can go back and change it in my connector. I'll click on Connectors, my offset source connector, Settings, and then scroll to the bottom where I see Processing Position. I'll go ahead and click Edit. To see the format that I need to use, I'll click on the documentation link and select the HTTP source connector. In this case, I'm updating my offset, so I'll click on that tab. Here you can see the formatting I need to use to update the offset. Since I'm updating from the GUI, I don't need the beginning portion, just the partition and URL and the updated offset. So I'll head back to Confluent Cloud. I'll change the offset position to where I'd like the connector to pick things up. In this case, I'll select offset 10, which will align with the 10th record from my list. Now I'll click Apply and Restart, and we'll head over to our topic to see if the offset was updated. Sure enough, there it is, record number 10. And to verify that that was the case, I'll go ahead and click From Beginning, and you'll see that it went from record 15 back to record 10 when I made the change in my offset. Now let's go ahead and set up our sync connector. I'll click on Connectors and add a new connector. This time I'll be using the S3 sync connector. I'll select my source topic and click Continue. Generate an API key and download it and click Continue. Be sure to check out my other video on setting up and using the S3 sync connector on Confluent Developer for a greater in-depth and hands-on with the S3 sync connector. I then need to select my AWS region, in this case it's US West 2, and provide the authentication. Under Credentials, I'll select that I'll be using an IAM role and then select the offset_S3 that I configured earlier. I'll head over to S3, copy my bucket name, and paste that in as well. And then I'll click Continue. My input record format was JSON SR and the output will be JSON. I'll set the time interval to be hourly and I'll leave the default flush size. I'm not using client-side field level encryption, but to set our offset, I'll expand the advanced configurations and scroll down to the bottom and click Set Offset. In this case, I want to set a specific position, and I'll jump back over to the documentation to see the formatting. I'll scroll down until I find Sync Connectors. Again, I'm updating the offset, and I can see the format here. Again, since we're using the GUI, we will only need a portion of the code, the Kafka partition, topic, and the new offset. I'll head back to Confluent Cloud and paste in the values. In this case, you can see I'm using Kafka partition 0, and my topic name is source names, and then I want to set my new offset to 10. If everything goes right, that should give us record number 15, since our first record on our source was record number 5. Just a reminder that since we are working with a sync offset, we are working with the actual Kafka offset. This has no bearing on the record number coming from our HTTP source. I'll go ahead and click Continue. I'll leave the default task set to 1 and click Continue. I'll give my connector the name of offset sync and review the settings one more time. Again, this is where you'd copy the JSON to automate the setup using the CLI. I'll click Continue and my connector will be created. Once that has been provisioned, I can click on the connector to make sure that it is processing messages. Since I configured the sync to output every hour, this may take a while to show up in S3, unless your source connector has been running for a while. In my case, through the magic of editing, we'll jump ahead. Let's jump over to S3 to see if our messages are coming in and if they start with the correct offset. I'll go ahead and hit refresh, and there we go. We see our topics, source names, the year, the month, the day, the hour, and there's our JSON. We'll go ahead and click download and open up this file. We can see that our first offset is in fact record number 15, which is exactly what we were expecting. That's it. Hopefully that was helpful in understanding how easy it is to set custom offsets for your connectors. Be sure to take a look at the documentation to dive more into the additional features and parameters for each source and sync connector. And until next time, happy streaming.